Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Delivery Committee and our unbelievable 7th meeting online. My name's Nick Barr. I'm the chair of the Service Delivery Committee. And can I just ask anybody who's going to be speaking to introduce themselves first, and if others wish to speak, just raise your hand in the usual manner, and I will endeavour to manage that as we go through the meeting. Welcome to Ian Harron from Scottish Government and Robert Scott. Particular welcome to Robert, who's going to be joining us now in a more formal capacity as a regular attendee at the committee's business. So my colleagues and I will be looking forward to your interaction with the committee, Robert. So thank you very much. We'll aim to take a break around 11:30, just as a matter of interest. And I'd also like to express my thanks to colleagues for another set of excellent papers. It's been quite a read, and there's obviously an incredible amount of work that goes on in between the quarterly meetings. I'll just mention that we have a strategy day tomorrow, so let's see how the timing is. And that strategy day has got some significant overlap with today's meeting. So let's just see how the timing of today's meeting goes. And I may encourage colleagues to perhaps wait until the following day if we're going to get into some any lengthy or in-depth discussions. There's two final notes I'd like to make. One is, could colleagues just bear with me? I'm working from home today. I'm the only person in the house, and there could be one or two callers that I'm not aware of. So if I suddenly got to pause the meeting and just sort something out, then please bear with me. And also there'll be a private meeting, very short private meeting, following on from this public meeting at the end of it all. So with all that in order, Ali, do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager. Yes, to confirm, we've got Board Member Angelina Foster, and also we've got the Deputy Chief Officer, Ross Haggart, who's given their formal apologies.
Okay, thank you, and noted.
Okay.
Colleagues, are there any items that you feel should be taken in private from the agenda? We don't actually have very much on the agenda for the private meeting, so I don't think it's appropriate to go the other way around. But is there anything on the agenda at the moment that would indicate that we need to take that in private? No? Okay, thank you. Declaration of interest. Has anybody got any declarations of interest? And if not, if any do become apparent during the meeting, please flag that up and we'll deal with it as appropriate. Okay. No, thank you very much. Agenda item 5, minutes of the previous meeting on the 1st of September. Could we please make any notes to me about inaccuracies or errors in the last minutes, please? I'll not aim to go through page by page, but if anybody has anything they'd like to say, please speak up now. Yep, all going splendidly so far. Oh, John.
Nick, thank you. John Dickey, Director of Training, Safety and Assurance. Nick, I could be wrong. I think it's just a wee spelling mistake. On page 3 of 10 of the minutes, it's 7.5. Stuart was given an update. However, Stuart Stevens assured the committee that the service had business as usual staffing model, specialist resources and appliances available. I think that should then be we're continuing to scenario plan and have a cadre. I could be wrong, but it just didn't seem right to me, but happy to be corrected.
I'd support that, Chair.
Yeah, it could be either. You could, if you took the words following that out, assured the committee that the service had a business as usual staffing model, were continuing to scenario plan, and had a cadre of volunteers to be stood up. I don't. We are. That's fine. So Debbie, could you just make that amendment, please? Is there anything further? No. Okay. Thank you. Ali, could you take us through item 6, please? And that's the action log.
Thank you, Chair. So just to confirm for committee members, we have 4 actions which are sitting on the action log, all of which have been marked blue as completed. So just to confirm, the committee are content with the position statement updates and for these to be removed accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ali. Nobody flagging up anything, so we'll continue. Thank you. That's excellent work. Nice to see those cleared away. Get to item 7, service delivery update report. And in the absence of the Deputy Chief Officer, I'll hand over to the Director of Service Delivery, Stuart.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Stuart Stevens, Assistant Chief Officer and Director of Service Delivery. As the Chair rightly says, I'm presenting this on behalf of the Deputy Chief Officer in his absence. This report provides the committee with an overview of the relevant main activities carried out over this reporting period. I would remind the committee that for purposes of this committee's role, Service Delivery comprises of the Training, Safety and Assurance Directorate as well as my own Directorate, Service Delivery. I'll expand on some of the points within the Service Delivery element and then I'll invite John Dickey to do likewise for the TSA element, and then happy to pause and take any questions at that stage, Chair. So if I perhaps take you to the appendix and pick up on the command and control planning. At the last meeting, we signalled that there was going to be an upgrade to the Edinburgh OC-X system, and that refresh has taken place, that hardware refresh has taken place, and it's anticipated that that will reduce the number of telephony faults that we had in EOC over the last wee while. I should point out that EOC did experience one critical fault over the reporting period due to the mobilised system. That was an outage that was caused by an upgrade by Capita that was uploaded that had a bug within the system and caused the system to fail. It was quickly rectified within an hour, but for that hour period, clearly we'd lost the OC system within Edinburgh. There'll be no more updates being carried out unless they're absolutely critical, but for assurance, one was carried out before COP26 to update on the PDAs for MTA type incidents, and that went with no issues whatsoever, thankfully. You'll see that there's not been any other critical faults within Dundee or Johnston Control. However, I should report that Johnston Control suffered a power outage just the weekend before COP20, or the weekend of COP26 as it started. That was nothing to do with the command and control systems. It was to do with the backup power generator and battery supply for OC. I've commissioned a full OA process and debrief to make sure that we learn the lessons from that and eradicate the human error elements that contributed towards that power outage. Make you aware of the operational strategy. So the first iteration of that is now with me, and it looks in really good shape. It looks excellent indeed, and we'll bring that forward to a future committee. If I take you to the RVDS improvement programme, and it's just to make the committee aware that a programme board has now been established with a number of projects that sits beneath. I chair that programme board, and hopefully what that illustrates is the level of commitment the service are putting towards rectifying the RVDS challenges that we've experienced over the last few years and continue to do so. MTA response, so the MTA response went formally live at 0800 on Saturday the 30th of October, so we now have a formalised MTA response from frontline stations within each service delivery area. The last point on that area I'll cover is COP26. Clearly recognising what the Chair said in terms of tomorrow's strategy day, I think I'll just say that the event itself went well. BAU was maintained at 96% confidence levels and above for the duration of the event, and all the COP resources that we put in place and special resources were fully resourced for the full duration of the event. The evaluation and lessons learned from the COP process will now be now be formalised and written up over the next few months. And again, that will come forward to the board in due course. In terms of prevention and protection activity, the autumn thematic plan was delivered. Primarily that evolves around about bonfire period, and it was very positive to note that there was a reduction in bonfire and fireworks related incidents. There was also a reduction in acts of violence. However, disappointingly, there's still 8 acts of violence that took place over bonfire period, which resulted in some firefighters being injured, and thankfully they've made a full recovery from those injuries. In terms of the youth volunteer scheme, I'd just like to highlight the fact that we now have a further youth volunteer scheme has went live at Methil, following on from the Alloa one last period, and in the near future Coatbridge will go live as well. So that takes us up to 10 youth volunteer schemes are now live across the organisation. Just a couple of incidents to highlight. The level 4 incident took place in the Elephant House in George IV Bridge. I attended that incident in August, a very complex and challenging incident. Difficult ambient temperatures that day as well. It was a very warm day in Edinburgh. My own reflections of the incident, it was dealt with exceptionally well and very professionally by all the crews involved, and under what was really difficult circumstances and quite punishing environment. And the incident in Ayr that took place with the gas explosion, again, that was in October of this year. The initial actions from the crews were absolutely exemplary and contributed towards those individuals who were caught up in the incident being rescued and allowed to go to hospital immediately. I'll pause at that, Chair, and invite John in if there's anything he wants to update on the TAC element.
Thanks, Stuart. John Dickey, Assistant Chief Officer, Director of Training, Safety and Assurance. Committee members, just building on what's in front of you in the report, I'll quickly touch on CCF. CCF is still moving at a pace. Some work that had to be done was, and the outcome of the Digital Audit Office review was the delivery of an MVP, which we have now delivered, and Sustell are aware of that, and they're working towards what that minimum viable product will look like, and we hope to get that in January. Training was put on hold because of COP26, but it will be due to start with supervisory managers either this week or next week, and then frontline staff in January. The rectification plan is being monitored on a weekly basis by myself at the strategic meeting with Sustell and Sustell's project manager. It is moving and is almost at completion with regards the rectification plan. From Ops Assurance, Stuart just mentioned there about the Elephant House in Edinburgh. That generated an OA21, and that's been now dealt with and closed. And the OA team are engaging across the SDAs, east and west in the new year, but in the north, and that's engaging with our supervisory managers to ensure that they've got a full working knowledge of OA. We've done a thematic audit, and it seemed at points there was a bit of lack of confidence in using the system, so we identified that as a gap, and we're now to try to bridge that gap and close that gap. From a training point of view, Portlethen has went live. I've been up a number of times now to see the Portlethen Training Centre. I've got to say that Ian Morris's team and the contractors have done a fantastic job there, absolutely fantastic. I did go up to support the team up there as we went through the commissioning and the live burns, and there was two crews there from Aberdeen that day, and I took the opportunity to engage with them to find out what their views were on the training centre, and they all thought it was excellent. They were speaking very highly of it, as were the instructional staff. We still are working from a training perspective. We're still working through the training recovery plans, and the team are working hard across the entire service to deliver these plans and support service and continue supporting service delivery. Stuart's mentioned also the COP26. There was a lot of work done between service delivery and the training team in preparation for COP26. and we delivered a number of training events that we had to be light on our feet, so we could deliver them in time for the COP26. Colleagues, that was just some additional information there, and I'm happy to take any questions on the areas of my responsibility. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, John. Board colleagues, let's just go back over both those now with questions. Leslie, you go ahead first.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Leslie Bloomer, board member. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, John. That was a helpful and interesting report, really informative. Thank you. A couple of questions. Firstly, Stuart, what you were saying about the outages at Edinburgh and Johnson Operations Control. Can we just, can you tell us about the backup arrangements? Did they kick in okay in terms of other OC centres covering those outages? So can you just tell us about that? Second, well, just run through all the questions I've got, Nick.
I'll tell you what, because some of them will be quite rapid fire, so let's just do one at a time, if you don't mind.
Perfect, yeah. Happy to do that. Yeah, so just for the assurance of the committee, the backup arrangements did kick in. The Johnson one's diverted to Northern Ireland for a very short period of time whilst the standby control was set up, and the Edinburgh one, the calls diverted to Dundee, and obviously they still managed to deal with some elements of it themselves, however not with the full functionality of the system.
That's super, thank you for that. And next two are for John. Just any outstanding concerns about the CCF implementation? It feels as though we're finally getting to the implementation stage. And the second question for Jock is just about training. It's great to see the upswing in training, and it's great to see the training support to the COP work. I'm just wondering if there's any areas at the moment where lack of training is constraining our operational response.
I'll take the last question first, Leslie. There's no areas constraining training. The constraints within training is capacity, and it'll always be capacity, and that capacity is hampered slightly by the COVID secure implications, but also the reprioritisation of work, and the ask of service delivery. And it's nothing, that's not against service delivery, it's just the sheer ask and the volume that's required, along with the travelling, etc., that's required to do that. Hence why the teams are working remotely. So, for example, ICL 3s and 2s have been done remotely, and there was an ICL course this week, ICL 3 course this week, which was done, and it was well received by all. So it's not stopping us from getting training done, Leslie, but we had to divert and reprioritise some work to ensure that we could get the MTA done for COP26, as well as additional work that needed to be done on some specialist resources and specialist skill sets that were required. So for me, I'm not overly concerned at this point with regards to that, and we do monitor it on a regular basis. And in fact, I've asked for there's a report goes to the SMB Reset and Renew regularly on the 4 recovery plans and how they're performing. So they are monitored on a regular basis at SMB. And with regards to, sorry, Stuart's got his hand up. I don't know if it's to.
Yeah, it was just perhaps just in terms of impact on service delivery, Leslie. What John's saying, the work that training have done over the last few months to support us in terms of COP26 has been absolutely superb. But there is a considerable backlog in terms of training, the specialist skills training, and the impact that's been felt for us is in terms of the use of part on roster reserve days, but more importantly, the increased use of pre-arranged overtime, which you'll see coming through on board reports. So there is an impact. We're managing it. As I've taken you back to the point in terms of we've maintained 96%, we've kept all our specialist resources on the run, so that's a good indicator. And obviously, as John says, the recovery plan that Train have got in place will help us get back to where we need to be, but that's going to be quite an iterative process.
Okay, that's really helpful. And again, well done for the support in COP26. And the CCF point, I know others will go into this in more detail, so it's just generally, are there any outstanding concerns? I don't know.
I mean, I monitor this on a weekly basis. The CCF board, and now I've got Stuart on board and the CCF board, so both of us are up to speed on where we are with regards to CCF. I'm maintaining pressure on Sistel on a weekly basis and to deliver. I'm also, as I said in the update report, I look at the rectification plan at both the strategic meeting but also at the CCF board, and we had a good update on that last week. There's a number of issues that SFRS need to do as well, and I'm pushing SFRS ICT to ensure that everything that we need to do is in place that supports Sistel. So the next real kind of big one for us is completion of the rectification plan, and I'm certain that will be completed in the next couple of weeks. If we can just not go into too much detail, but there's an issue with some BT lines that need to be sorted out, and that's on our side. But that's third party, unfortunately, and sometimes bringing that third party to the fore sometimes can be difficult. But getting the MVP and the go live version in January will be a critical point. And as we start the training, etc. After we get that version in January, we won't be accepting any update versions, and that will be the go live version.
So I think the position then, as I'm understanding it, is there are a whole range of ongoing concerns, as there always are with this project, and you're on them. Yeah, thank you for that update. I'm
on them along with Gary, and I'm being fully supported by SLT and SMB on that as well.
Yeah, I think I'll just make a note there that it's a sort of inevitable, necessary evil that we have an overlap now between the Change Committee and the Service Delivery Committee, because obviously as we approach a go live date, the Service Delivery Committee starts to take much more interest in the new product, as well as keeping an eye on the existing legacy systems in terms of its sort of a strict remit. So apologies to service colleagues who perhaps have to duplicate some of the comments there, but I think those that are on the Change Committee will be well aware of the immense amount of work that's going in around this. So thanks to all. Leslie, do you have any further questions? Malcolm, Tim, anything to add before I ask? No.
Thanks, Stuart.
Okay.
I was pleased to hear that the CCF was still moving. That means it's alive, John. So that's good.
Good. So is everybody else. Excellent. Stuart, could I ask you a couple of questions? I'm just going to look away from the screen a little bit here and read a few things. So the EOC critical faults, we talked about that, and we talked about the refresh on the ICSIS. The telephony, what sort of percentage of critical faults that occur? I mean, if you can't answer this, I'm not after an absolutely accurate figure, but what sort of percentage of critical faults within the EOC are telephony based?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Right. If I could bring that to the next committee.
No, don't. I was just wanted to see the potential impact of doing that integrated communications control system refresh on the total number of critical faults. Can I just talk a little bit around the edges of MTA? The MTA response was a massive amount of work that went in as it ramped up towards COP26. Obviously, it's now a permanent feature. Is that correct?
It's permanent until March next year, Nick. So that's an interim arrangement that's in place until the 31st of March 2022. But there's an 8-week window beforehand where we can renegotiate with those who have signed up to MTA to extend that beyond that period.
Okay. Thank you for that. Just bear with me.
And it's probably worthwhile noting as well that recognising the HMI is here. That was a point made within the HMI report of COP26 to encourage the organisation and the FBU to seek a positive direction in terms of making it a permanent arrangement in Scotland. And obviously we commit absolutely to doing that.
Sure. Moving on to John's. Sorry, John, there's a couple of quick fire questions here you'll be able to answer at the snap of your fingers. OA21.
Yeah.
What's OA21?
Operational Assurance 21. It's a process we put in place after the Balmoral Bar Implementation Group. It's an agreement between the Procurator Fiscal and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service that, because of the length of time it took during the Balmoral Bar investigation, etc., Lewis Ramsey at the time was the director of R&R, and he got an agreement with the Procurator Fiscal that, because if there was lessons to be learned, quick fire that would have firefighter safety implications, we would put a process in place that would turn that around within 21 days. It doesn't happen that often, OA21s, but basically we'll have a quick investigation in anticipation of the full investigation being done under health and safety, and if there's any local or national issues that need to be addressed quickly within that 21-day period, that's what the OA21 process is for.
Oh, marvellous. Okay, that's a fantastic explanation, something I wasn't aware of. That's great, thank you. You say also Operation Assurance are currently managing 7 significant event action plans through to completion. Is 7 a big number? Are you normally sitting at 1 or 2, or are you sitting normally at 15? You know, what is it? Give me some feel.
Sorry, Nick, I'm just looking at the
oh, right, it's just simply that, really. Page 15 of 17, halfway down the page. Simply, OA are currently managing 7 significant event action plans through to completion.
Yeah, that's not an issue for us. They're all in various stages of completion. So no, it's not necessarily an issue. No, not
okay.
at all.
I know this is a small point, but it's just something that attracted my eye that I'm just interested in knowing about. Future frontline, just at the bottom of that section of the paper, future frontline updates have been developed. Attempted theft from ATM using improvised explosive devices. Yeah. So is this something that's clearly a growing, well, I'm presuming clearly a growing trend that you get called to, that you now need to provide some form of training? Unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, this is information about incidents that we've actually attended. So that's where the frontline update will come from. But we also pick up frontline updates from incidents that happen, elsewhere in the UK and indeed worldwide if required. But there has been incidents here in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service using IEDs at ATMs.
Right. Okay.
So the idea behind the frontline update, Nick, is to try and share any learning that we get across service, because there'll be individuals, there'll be colleagues in various areas of Scotland that may well never see this, and that the only opportunity to see it is so we get pictures and we give a give an overview of that incident and any learning points that's been picked up.
Yeah. No. Excellent. Thank you. It's a sad indictment of our today's world, I guess. And on that note, and a closing comment, really, I really just want to put on record the committee's disappointment to hear the attacks on the firefighters, because it's simply unacceptable. So I feel that well, it's just unacceptable. End of story. So I really would like that recorded in the minutes for what that's worth, but I just think I'd like to know that. Thank you, colleagues. A good go through of the service delivery update report. Let's move now to item 8. Stuart, your name's against 8.1. So it's I guess it's either you, Richard, or Chris.
Thanks, Nick. As ever, it's a team effort, and I'll bring Chris in, our business analyst manager. I think I've got your title wrong there, Chris, so I'll let you correct that. Who will take us through the performance report, and I can provide any more detail in terms of the individual aspects as we go through. Chris.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Chair. Chris Fitzpatrick, Business Intelligence and Data Services Manager. If you can bear with me 2 seconds. Yeah, so as usual with the summary, I'll cover the salient points presented in this quarter's report. For ease, I'll share the report on screen to hopefully make it easier to digest and allow me to share a little further insight. I'll try not to repeat too much of the current narrative and focus on the key elements, but happy to take any questions along with Stuart at the end. With this being the second period that we've used the new reporting software to create the quarterly report and the dashboard, I wanted to confirm that we have been able to address a couple of the comments made at the Q1 meeting, and I should be able to provide more detail to add context where necessary. For information, we've created a security group for Service Delivery Committee members where they will have access to the reporting dashboard from Q3 onwards. This will be made available at the point where the report's provided to Service Delivery Committee in line with the timetable deadlines, and it will be available with the latest reporting period figures. So just very quickly, for navigating on the dashboard, the content pages are hyperlinks, if you like, so we just click on these to move forward. So to simplify the review itself, the quarterly review, we've included a summary page, a single summary page, which focuses on the indicators where the targets have specified values. So that's the top section of the table. The bottom section of the table just lists the indicators where there is no target and it's set to monitor. At present, we're looking at 9 KPIs where performance is ahead of target, 1 KPI slightly off target, and 5 indicators behind target. Moving on to home fire safety visits. Home fire safety visits are more than twice the amount recorded the previous year. And on review of each of the risk categories, we can see that the increase has been evident across all 3. So clearly with the target set, that was reached this year. The line graphs on the right-hand side of this page clearly show the impact that the pandemic has had and the restrictions on movement has had on our ability to conduct visits. So since the 2020, since Q1 in 2020, we can see that there's been an up and down, again, in line with the restrictions on movements. If I move on to UFAS incidents, there had been some confusion just around the narrative that I provided. So this page was set to hopefully try and give some clarification. The target for improvement of UFAS events for this period would have been a value of 13,874. So actual incidents were lower at 13,711, meaning we did achieve that 2.5% reduction over the moving 3-year average. The top line graph shows the monthly incident breakdowns from the end of 2019 and the significantly low activity throughout 2021. So this is on blue light journeys. As we've progressed this latest fiscal year, we are seeing a higher number of journeys relative to the increased activity for that same period. The bottom line graph has shown that since August 2020, the service has been able to maintain an attendance level of 1.5 appliances at all UFAS incidents, which is significantly lower than prior to that period. Just moving on to fire fatalities. The fire fatalities are lower at this point last year, but they remain slightly higher than 2018-19 and 2019-20, and that reflects on us not having achieved the set target. Figures across the LSO areas are fairly disparate. It isn't possible to identify any geographical inference from the way the figures are broken down. The tables below the LSO breakdown provides more context and consideration of both age and sex and where alcohol or drugs may have been a factor in the incident occurrence. Looking at the year-to-date figures for the last 5 years, male casualties in the 40 to 69 bracket are more than 2.5 times that of the female fatalities. In 2021 into 22, the 2 fire fatalities that had been recorded as female were both stated as over the age of 70. Fatality rates under the age of 40 are relatively low across the 5 years. It was 9 in total, and 2 of those were recorded this fiscal year. Looking at accidental dwelling fire casualties, if committee members have recently looked at the previous Q2 report, you would note that this time last year, accidental dwelling fire casualties numbered 188. The current report reflects accidental dwelling fire casualties for that same period now at 232. In our more extensive quality assurance processes that take place for year-end statistical publications, we identified a number of incidents where crews had not recorded casualties mentioned in dialogue between the incident ground and control. So we've spoken with colleagues in service delivery, headed by Stuart, and we've released an alert to operational staff that flags the issues and where to seek support through data services if required. ACO Stevens has also included data services in future service delivery continuous improvement forums, where we can more readily share any data quality concerns and agree an appropriate way forward. Unfortunately, for at least the remainder of this year, there will be disparity between the figures presented in the last year's reports, so Q3 and Q4. From the quality assurance work done between July and October, we reckon it's between 25 and 30% uplift that we'll see with the year-end figures. I've tried to ensure that what we reported for this current year will be as accurate as possible, but it's down to the volume of incidents and the staff available to do the quality assurance, which means getting that information 100% clean at the end of the quarter is quite a difficult thing for us to do. But again, working with service delivery, we're trying to make sure that there's processes in place for crews to reach out to information available, but also reach out to staff to ask any questions should it be required. Moving on to call handling, this was one of the areas that came up in Q1. So for the current fiscal year, the service is marginally it's marginally down, 3 seconds for the service as a whole. The reductions coming through the instance handled in the West Service Delivery area. East remains the same as last year, and North has increased by 3 seconds. The line graph for the call handling times has been included just to demonstrate the distribution of our data. Normal distribution would display as a bell curve equally balanced on both sides. But as you can see from the graph, the distribution is skewed and tails off to the right. If we were to use the mean value to measure our performance, we would see the impact of the higher value times currently captured in the right-hand tail, and it wouldn't be reflective of our typical value, our typical response, which would be the middle value, the median value. For information, the mean value in this instance would be a further 18 seconds higher than the median. The page also shows the number of incidents that are taken into account when we calculate the median, and it shows the number of incidents excluded. So just now, less than 1% of recorded activity is classed as inaccurate or as an exception. I'll also share the response in the same way. So response times is a very similar distribution to call handling, where the median response time for Scotland is 8 minutes and 12 seconds. The variation across the country equates to 2 minutes, with a predominantly higher number of attendances to urban locations in the west being around 7.6 minutes, and the more rural locations within the north were seeing higher response of 9.6. And that's the summary for this quarter, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very interesting indeed. I wonder, just for a moment, would you mind stop sharing your screen, and then I can see more readily the colleagues if they have their hands up, and then if we need to jump back to you, Chris, we can do so. Malcolm, you put your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Malcolm Payton, board member and member of the Service Delivery Committee. Just a couple of little things. One is, I noticed it says negative call handling time, but I just wondered if you could clarify what that is, what a negative call handling time is. There's a number there. And the other question was, I see, you were saying about alcohol and drugs. You obviously try and gather information whether that is relevant. Is that because alcohol and drugs have caused the fire, so to speak, or is it more that someone perhaps fire started, but they've not, they've been a bit unconscious in a sense, and they've not responded properly? Can you distinguish between these two? I don't know, but just any thoughts on that would be interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, sure, Marco. In terms of the negative call handling times, unfortunately, we do get bugs within the system, which means that we can show a time where a station has been requested to mobilise as being earlier than the actual timestamp for the incident itself, which is not possible. But hopefully you were able to see from the values there, it's very, very, it's minimal. It's not something we see a great deal. And again, it is something that we would hope to be able to rectify with CCMS being in place, because it would be much easier for us to identify any occurrences like that and deal with the quality aspect of it. In terms of the fatality side of things with alcohol and drugs, both situations are possible. So within the incident itself, within IRS, we can indicate that the incident may have occurred as alcohol and drugs being included as a factor, but equally we can look at it from a casualties perspective, and if the information is available. On this instance, what I was presenting was based on the incident, not on the actual casualty.
Okay, no, thank you. That was really helpful. And Chair, if you will indulge me just for a moment longer. The other thing is, I think this may have been the first time we've seen an actual live report where you were not showing slides or something, but you were actually on the system and able to click on things and drill down. And I think that's fantastic that, that is working, and instead of having to go to all the effort of typing stuff up, in a sense, it's there and you can drill down. That was what we're looking for, and I think that's an amazing achievement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seconded, and I'm sure Leslie was saying the same there. Tim, go ahead.
Thank you, Nick. Tim Wright, board member and member of Service Delivery Committee. Chris, this is tremendous to see. We're making real progress here. Without wanting to go down a rabbit hole here, when I think about the kind of management information that was available to us when we first joined the board a few years ago, this is light years ahead, and we're getting to a position where we really need to be. Particularly pleased to hear about the work that you're doing around QA, because this is still obviously a bedding in period, and there's lots and lots of additional work across the service that will help us ensure that the data that we're seeing is accurate and up to date. And I believe also that you and your team are being involved with the procurement of some of the line of business applications that are coming in, make sure that they're data compliant as well. In terms of actual questions about what you've presented to us, rather than just saying this is terrific, I did have just one clarification for me, and apologies to you and apologies to my colleagues on the committee if this has ever been covered before. But I was looking at the home fire safety visits, and I was trying to figure out in my own mind why we're the monitoring indicator that we have for number of home fire safety visits conducted in total is based on previous year, when all of the other ones we're looking at an increase based on a moving 3-year average. I'm wondering why we've differentiated between it. And my apologies if it's just my brain fade and you've explained this before, or and I've just forgotten.
Thanks, Tim. Just to backtrack in terms of the quality assurance side of things, this is something that Richard and I are driving through every conversation that we have with colleagues and other directorates, where we know where we've been put in a position and we can supply the tools to give you the ability to look at the performance of the service. But we're focusing on the numbers that are in there. We have to ensure that the information that is going in is the right information. Otherwise, we're not succeeding in giving you the tools to be able to look at that. So it's constantly on our radar. And with, I think you're referring to the PTFAS side of things, we are heavily involved and have been heavily involved with colleagues at the outset. And we will be looking at the data quality side of things and also the data standards element of it. That's a key feature in our work taking us up to the end of this fiscal year. So I just wanted to make that statement again to give you assurance that it's front and centre with everything that we're trying to do. With the home fire safety visits, the target, it's as I understand, it's purely been transferred from as far back as PMF 2018. It's the same target that's been in place. If it's deemed not to be fit for purpose and we want to change that, then we'll have the opportunity to do that in the coming months as we start to review all of the strategic documents, strategic planning and PMF for the following year.
That's terrific, and I guess it's a conversation that perhaps colleagues on the committee might want to have about whether there should be any adjustment to that. Yes, and certainly, the old adage "garbage in, garbage out" is kind of speaks to the importance of the quality assurance. If you'll indulge me, Nick, it just prompted me on thinking about, and maybe just throwing into the conversation here. I know that the new ICT strategy is being developed, and I'm conscious of the fact that one of the elements that it will go into that will be around sensing and using automatic data gathering rather than manual entry, which I think will go some way to reassure us around the accuracy and quality of the data that we're capturing. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate your response.
You're welcome.
Leslie.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry, I've noticed Richard just got his hand up as well. Was it in relation to the previous answer?
Apologies, I failed to notice Richard's hand. Richard.
Thank you both. It was just to answer Tim's point on the data strategy. So I've been part of the working group for that. Tim and Chris and I have working closely with colleagues particularly around the data section and the data standards to align the ambitions of the BI strategy with the data and digital, the digital strategy and the data element within that, just to give you some further assurance. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you, Richard. Excellent. All good to hear.
Richard. Sorry, Leslie, go.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for that, Chris. That was very helpful. I've got a few points, if I may, Nick. Picking up on the home fire safety visits, first of all, I'm just interested in your thinking about the level of priority or the percentage of visits to vulnerable groups, and whether the catch up in the number of visits that we're doing, whether that will end up being predominantly less vulnerable or predominantly more vulnerable. More broadly, when we look at the new fire framework, there's an emphasis there on equalities and how we look at equalities there. And I'm just wondering about any thinking that you're beginning to do in relation to home fire safety visits in terms of getting an understanding of the level of kind of market penetration, to use a commercial term, that we're getting with vulnerable groups. We know how many visits we're doing to vulnerable people, but do we know if that is 30% of the total vulnerable population, or is that 80% of the total vulnerable population? So I'd be interested in your thinking around that. You could also get into ethnicity and socioeconomic areas as well. So that's a kind of broad question. I've got some more specific questions, Nick, after that.
Yeah, could we just do that? Could I just add a supplementary question to Leslie's point there, because she's touched on something that I'm interested in as well. And Stuart, could you just give some thought as to whether or not this may be worth perhaps a separate little piece on this, Stuart and Richard, about this? My additional aspect on what Leslie's asked is, it struck me, and perhaps this should have struck me before, but and in some ways it's obvious, but I just quickly looked at the number of home fire safety visits conducted for vulnerable groups. it strikes me is that almost that's a really key enabler statistic, isn't it? Because if we got that one, if you got that one nailed and really there, it seemed to me, and I went back across the PMF indicators that were in that same paragraph, and I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 others that could be influenced, that if we could increase the vulnerable groups home fire safety visits, it could have a really positive effect on 9 other indicators there. And I just wonder whether or not, oh, sorry, I'm now interested to know what sort of development work is going along that, if I'm correct. So that's all a sort of bundle of stuff. We can also, if we feel it necessary, we could also look at that on a separate piece next time. I don't know who's going to answer that one.
I'll start. I could be here for some time, so please interject if you need me to. So our current approach to home fire safety visit is a very universal delivery of the product. You know, it's the kind of the centre plank of all our community safety engagement activity. Clearly developing the Safe and Well programme, which will begin to roll out as of the start of next calendar year. That will inevitably take us down the route of being much more targeted in terms of the interventions that we do, because the visits are going to be longer, they're going to be more detailed. And you're absolutely right. If we could focus on high-risk individuals primarily, then that would pretty much take care of all the other indicators that surround that, Nick. But it's really, really difficult because we rely upon, one, high-risk individuals either coming forward of their own volition, or two, and more importantly, meaningful partnership referral processes in place to allow us to generate those visits. And that's what Safe and Well will hopefully allow us to do, that we'll start to open those doors. And we do have good partnership referral processes in place, but they could be better. We have learned a lot over COVID in terms of access, and this is the key point, to data of vulnerable individuals. If we could have that data more readily available, then we could put all our efforts into high-risk home fire safety visits. And really, that's where I'd like to get to. I'd like to stop doing low and medium and just focus on high risk. But we need to make sure that we've got the people coming forward and targeting them to do that. And you've probably heard me talking numerous times at the committee around about the challenge that we have in terms of data sharing. And we're getting there, and there's loads of work going on in the background with Richard and his team and things like that to try and access that data. Does that fully kind of answer that? I think a deep dive into that area would probably be advantageous, to be honest, in terms of the point that Leslie made around about the breakdown of that.
I tell you what I'd like to do, rather than saying anything just now, as in terms of agreeing an action, I wonder, Stuart, possibly Stuart, Richard, could we just have a conversation afterwards about that? Because I am keen to understand more about that, and I'm sure Leslie is as well. So let's agree to talk after the meeting. Well,
sorry, just a final point I should probably add there as well, and remiss of me not to, that the CRIM that's being built at the moment, that's going to be an absolutely superb tool for us to surgically target home fire safety visit interventions, because of all the data sets that have been loaded into it. You can pretty much at a click of a button identify where the high risk individuals are within your community. The trick for us then is then to give that to local stations and areas, empower them to deliver home fire safety visit of their own, remove this 3-year just do more than you done last year approach, and let's do quality over quantity and really target those individuals. So, but we need to have the tools in place, and having seen the CRIM model in the moment and what CRIM 2 will offer, I think we're just about there, to be honest, and that will really take us that next step forward to target high risk.
I guess also, and I'll just add that the key is also not doing it in pure isolation. It's doing it in partnership with the other agencies. Indeed. However, I'm just keen to move on a little bit. Richard, then back to Leslie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to add to Stuart's points, in terms of that specific point, Leslie, around looking at data from different groupings, particularly protected characteristics, etc., etc. The chief statistician has written to us to think about this. So we are thinking about this and all that comes with it, because there is a whole area of thought there about how we capture, where we capture, when we capture it, all that stuff. So that, yes, there's that. The other part, Stuart mentioned the CRIM. So we have one of our team now embedded within the CRIM, that process. And additionally, in terms of the key points around data, Chris and I are engaged in a number of different meetings and groups, both nationally and also directly with partners to talk about standards and data access. So some examples would be Public Health Scotland, NSS, for example, thinking about health data. And we're quite keen to develop that. And there's a number of meetings going on as where we do that. And also on that point around targeted interventions, we're also looking at where we might use machine learning in that respect as well. So we are aware of a number of products that exist in the States that are used by different fire and rescue services or emergency services in the States to do just that, to use bigger data to more accurately target your interventions to get a higher success rate. We're currently sharing data with NSS because they have an AI team, if you like, which we don't have. And we're using that relationship. They're using their Azure server to crunch masses of data that we can't, just to see if the model that's already been developed through a research student that we had in Chris's team on that specific issue can be turned into a live product. But that is very much development. So I suppose I just wanted you to see there that there's both direct practical activity going on and there's also sort of high-end might not work development going on. Just for your assurance. Chris, I don't know if there's anything else I've missed there, but thank you. Chair, sorry, it's remiss of me. It's didn't give you my title, Richard Wetton, Head of Governance Strategy and Performance. Thank you.
Noted. I'm just conscious of time. Chris, a couple of points and then we'll come back to Leslie.
It's very, very brief. Yeah, Rich kind of stole the thunder of it. It was really just to outline the future expectations using machine learning and AI to help engage and direct enforcement and community safety engagement. So it is something we've now been looking at since 2019. Unfortunately, when a student moves from university into their career path, things are not simplistic for us to be able to carry that research on. But fortunately, through engagement with National Services Scotland, we look as if we have an avenue to do that. And it is work that will support the CRIM. It's not standalone. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Noted. Back to Leslie.
That's been really helpful. Okay, quick questions. Am I right in thinking that the UFAS numbers are actually right back up there? Because if we are just marginally down in the 3-year average, then they must have absolutely soared. Is that right?
I wouldn't say they've soared. I would say, again, just from the figure that I've got in front of me just now, we're lower than the 3 years prior to the pandemic year. So UFAS numbers are down. We're just starting to see the increase in the blue light journeys because activity had been so low through 2020-21, but we are maintaining the reduction in appliances attending these incidents. So that's been consistent almost for the full year now, where it's down from over 2 appliances to 1.5 appliances per incident.
So I get that the blue light journeys continue to be down, which is welcome. However, are the UFAS numbers above what they were pre-COVID, or have I misunderstood that?
They are not above where they were. So we are still seeing lower attendances year to date. So for the past 5 years, if we exclude the pandemic year, we are lower than that previous period.
Thank you for clearing that up. Sorry.
Just add to that as well, Leslie. So you're absolutely right. They're going in the wrong direction again based on last year. And I've asked for assurance from my own team that we are fully involved in the whole UFAS reduction. So the 13 recommendations that came from the stock take report, there were nothing to do with changing our response, but how we work with partners, how we work with duty holders. But that's not falling off the table because we're going to be reliant on a potential change to UFAS stuff. So to give you assurance that's in place, and we'll make sure it's reassuring to note that it's not as high as it was before the pandemic. So I'm taking from that it's not as high as it was before we started all those activities. but it's definitely going in the wrong direction, and we'll need to keep a weather eye on it. But to give you that assurance, we are focused on it.
Thanks for clearing that up for me. That's really helpful. Again, welcome the focus on data quality. That's essential. In the olden days, external audit actually used to look at this, and I'm just wondering whether there might be a role for internal audit there, but I presume that you have that on your agenda as a possible tool, so no response required there. Call handling times. Thanks for the live graph information, Chris. That was really helpful. They continue to increase in North, and I know that, Stuart, I think you were looking in more detail at that, and I'm just wondering whether we'll get any more of a sense as to why they're continuing to increase in North. And I noted that the tail to the right-hand side of the graph was high for North, so I'd welcome any comments on that.
Yeah, I think there's a Chris, do you want to come in first? Because I'm probably just going to steal your thunder.
No, it is still something that we're looking at with David Farry's Stuart's team, but it's not straightforward for us because the control systems in the 3 areas we don't have the direct access to, so a lot of it's been a manual trawl looking at the background information. That's why it's been delayed as long as it has. But we are still actively engaged in it. Both myself and my team leader are speaking with a couple of colleagues in Ops to see if we can identify from the information we've got available within IRS and what we can access within the control systems if we're able to determine what it is that's driving it. But we're not seeing anything obvious. There's nothing jumping out to point to one or other subject. So I think it's a number of different factors that are impacting on it, but they are not alone. It's something we are seeing across the country, but it's just in different scales, if you like. Stuart, I don't know if that helps. Or...
No, I was just going to maybe add that there's a number of kind of external factors, Leslie, that predominantly impact upon the North in terms of geography, people unfamiliar with it. So call handling times inevitably can take longer to do, and then the attendance times are generally longer because of the geography involved in the North as well. So that's why the North sometimes looks a little bit different. And there was obviously an implication in terms of a number of new trainees that come on who perhaps may take a few more seconds to handle a call. But I think it's a very fine line between looking at attendance times and being too robust with them, because it can drive negative behaviours, both in terms of vehicle movements, control handling and things like that as well, you know. So I'm content at the moment there's nothing coming from a call handling that's causing the service any issues, but obviously we monitor it, as Chris says.
Okay, and just to clarify, it was not the vehicle attendance times, it was simply the call handling. I think vehicle attendance times, achieving what you are achieving in North is absolutely fantastic, given the geography. Okay, last point, non-refuse secondary fires, page 39 of the pack. There appears to be a hell of an increase, not hell of, sorry, there appears to be a substantial increase. Any idea what's going on there?
Chris, you want?
Hi, sorry, I don't have the information directly to hand, but I think from memory that's the Q1 impact that we had seen. So again, weather conditions playing a factor in that. I can certainly go and look at it and come back with a fuller answer, but I think the impact for year to date has been seen from Q1, if that makes sense.
Apologies, I wasn't at the last meeting, and if you covered that, then apologies. No need to come back on it. We'll just keep an eye on it over the next parts of the year. Thank you very much. Sure. Thanks for indulgence, Nick.
No problem at all, Leslie. All valid points. Thank you, team. I was going to say something there, and it's gone out of my head, so let's not. Okay, thank you, and thanks, Chris. That was a really interesting wasn't a whistle-stop tour, an interesting dive into the statistics. Thank you. Can we now move to agenda item 8.2, action plan and closing report updates? And Richard, could you just take us through these one by one so we can cope with it all, please?
Yes, will do. Thank you, Chair. So, colleagues, this is our normal update in terms of the audit and inspection action plans and closing report update. We have a number to go through for you. These include management of fleet and equipment, provision of operational risk information, planning and preparedness for COVID, command and control, fire safety enforcement, and some of those related to the local area inspections carried out by the inspector and his team. There are 2 formal closing reports, which you'll see related to the local area inspections, which I'll get onto. So the first one, Chair, is the Fleet and Equipment Action Plan.
Could you just pause for 2 seconds? Leslie, could you just lower your hand, please? Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is the Fleet and Equipment Action Plan. 29 actions had been previously completed and agreed. Within this section, there are 6 also marked as cancelled, because they're no longer progressed or the situation has altered considerably since the review is carried out, which leaves us with 2 remaining actions. These have been completed within the reporting period. And I think you remember last time we spoke about these in relation to the Wi-Fi installation at the ARCs, and I think we came back with an email for you, I think. Anyway, what we've got is they're now complete. So our assessment of this and the recommendations is that this is now green and 100% complete. And the formal closure report will be completed and submitted as part of the next quarterly update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good update. And given the fact we'll be getting a closing report next meeting, then I'm not expecting too many questions unless colleagues tell me differently. Leslie.
Sorry, Nick. Sorry, a very trivial point. The numbers don't add up in the paper, but I've got a substantive question. 38 actions, 29 agreed, 6 cancelled. That comes to 35. Remaining 2 live actions. That comes to 37. So I guess it's. I'm sure it's not an issue. We've also, I think we've got the same issue in the COVID numbers as well. So I'm going to just leave those sticking to the wall. In terms of fleet, recommendation 26. This is about recruitment of 4 drivers. And I don't know whether this is the right time or place to raise it, but I'm just wondering about the costs of recruitment of 4 drivers versus the savings in time. I just hadn't expected really that the action to be implemented is recruiting 4 drivers. I'm just wondering about what the costs versus the cost of that versus the savings in time are. And it mentions that there's a link to ESN project. I just wondered what that was about.
Could I just say something there, Leslie? That's an interesting point you raise. I'm not sure whether or not, to be very honest with you, I'm not sure whether or not that's within the remit of the committee, because I think then really we are now coming back and making comment about the SLT's decision making and actions that they've already previously agreed. Whereas our role is to see whether or not I feel our role is to see whether or not the recommendations that arise from the HMFSI action have been noted and dealt with appropriately. I'll leave that as a thought. I would welcome comment from other colleagues if necessary.
Can I just come back on that, please? I think absolutely it may not be an appropriate question for this time, where we're basically saying, progress on have the actions agreed been implemented. I think that the external audit report by Deloitte that we considered, I think at the last board meeting as part of the overall external audit report, did draw attention to the importance of the board overseeing savings and looking at best value. And I think that so there is that point. There is another point, which is when the fleet action plan came to us initially, then it might have been appropriate to raise this question then, because I think it's reasonable to say, are we absolutely sure that we need to recruit 4 drivers? So for those reasons, I'm absolutely content that the point I'm raising is not appropriate to raise now. And maybe when we get the action plans, then we just need to spend a wee bit more time thinking about the content of them and scrutinising them there. I'd welcome other thoughts, Nick.
Yeah, no, well, I welcome your open approach to this, and likewise, I'm just navigating this a little carefully. It's interesting, and we can't spend too much time on this, but interestingly, my observation on this was that the recommendation was actually about national guidance on the responsibility of the movement, not necessarily producing a job specification for drivers. Now, you know, that's a slight side which I've mentioned previously. However, I'll leave also that sticking to the wall. I notice, Robert, welcome your input there. Thank you. And then Richard Stewart, you did have your hand up, but you've dropped that again. So I'll presume you don't want to speak. So I'll go to Robert, then Richard, and then I think we will probably move on from that point. Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Robert Scott, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service at the Inspectorate, as you know. It's on that point that you've just picked up on there. I think the recommendation itself was not specific around how you resolved the issue. It was more about issuing national guidance, and it's not for us to specify how the service then interprets that and turns it into an action, and we would never wish to do that. But I would say that the recommendation itself was less than perfect in its wording, and probably could have been done with a bit more clarity about what was expected, and we'll certainly aim to improve on that in the future. But we're quite satisfied. And also, Sheriff, I might just follow up slightly. We carried a follow-up inspection relating to this inspection of fleet and equipment back in June this year, and as a result of that, I wrote to the Chief Officer and the Chair and your fleet manager to indicate that we were content that you were not fully complete, but you were on the right trajectory, and therefore we would not be revisiting this at any point in the future. So I'm delighted to see that the green lights are there and that this has been signed off and complete. I'm absolutely satisfied with the action that's been taken, and I would applaud the service for all the work that's gone into turning all of those 38 recommendations into grey boxes. It's a huge amount of work, and we don't underestimate that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Valuable input, Robert. Thank you. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. On the number disparity, apologies. On the main form, the appendix, they are correct. There's just been a disparity in the numbers there on the form. And I was going to make the point about the overall recommendation, but following that, which has been addressed by Robert, we have been challenging ourselves in SND much more about, are we meeting the actual recommendation? Because what we have found is that we've been going beyond the initial recommendation and sort of keeping things open as we do this and this and this. So there's that point. So this, I think, applies to this. And then if I may, Chair, just take that hat off for a second, and just from my governance hat, I think you're correct in what you say, but I think it's reasonable and fair that Leslie is able to ask those questions from a scrutiny perspective. So I think that's fine. And we obviously welcome those questions and happy to deal with them. Thank you, Chair.
Good points all. Thank you. Leslie, I'm presuming you don't want to come back at that just now, and we'll just move on. You're biting your tongue there. Go ahead, Leslie. Go on. No, okay. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. I won't delay you long. Just a minor point. Mea culpa, Richard. It was me that asked about the Wi-Fi, and yes, I did receive the emails. Thank you very much indeed for that. I just wanted to ask a quick question about, which I don't expect an answer to today, I should say. It's to do with the operational risk information. I know that there are a number of actions in there in terms of updating the tablets to do that are outside of our ability to deliver within short order, and so they have slipped. But I'm thrilled that the service has been looking at mitigation measures using SIMs from third-party providers and things like that. So I want to encourage that, but it'd be terrific on the next update if you could give us a sense on how well that mitigation is dealing with the challenge, and whether it will give us confidence that the fact that we're having to wait for third parties on airwave and things like that is less of an issue if we've got an alternative. So a quick update on the next report would be fabulous. Thank you.
That was a perfect lead into the next point. Can I just go back to Fleet and Equipment Action Plan just to make a closing statement? Leslie, absolutely encourage your challenge there. Absolutely, in no way did I mean to suppress that. So it was good. I think we perhaps just, as you say, perhaps along with SMB, SLT, etc., we all need to take that challenge and perhaps earlier on in the period. But however, let's move on now to 3.9 ORI. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the operational risk information report published back in 2019. 20 actions already agreed. So we're asking colleagues to scrutinise the remaining 5 actions. And as Tim said, progress has been limited. In terms of the revised due dates for the actions that were highlighted, most of these relate to projects that we're aware of, CCMS partly, but also ESMCP. Overall, though, still a 90% completion on this. Red rating is really just because we apply that to timing. So we're outside of our original timings. So really there for your scrutiny. And I suppose just on that point that Tim raised around tablets, we are discussing this stuff. There was a fairly good discussion about that very issue very recently, Tim, just about our options given some of the extended timescales around some of these projects, particularly ESMCP. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard, for that, and apologies for getting ahead of the agenda, Chair.
Oh, no problem, no problem. I don't have any further questions. Oh, Malcolm, sorry, apologies.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Sorry, no, I did just put my thanks again. Good to see the work, and I appreciate that there are things again. When I read some of the items, I'm thinking like the ICT one on what was it? Information on tablets again. I'm not quite sure what point I want to make here, to be honest, but I just feel it's a bit reactive. It's, we've discovered this and we're now looking at that, which is what we have to do. But I just wonder if there's something there we need to look at in a bit more depth in terms of, these are complex, large projects with lots of factors going on, and I don't have just quite the confidence that I do for many of the other areas where I see very clear reporting that says, this is what's happened, this is what we're planning to do, we appreciate this is a problem, we're going to deal with it. So I don't know, it just comes across as a little bit more reacting to circumstances in a sense, and apologies, that may just be the wording, or I may just be picking that up that way, but I just wonder if there's something there that we maybe need to look at some point in the future, saying, how are these bits fitting together, and what are the kind of risks we're managing?
Noted, Malcolm. I think with any of these things, as is finding with the CCMS project work as well, it's the third-party reliability and interaction that really starts to go outside your control, doesn't it? And that seems to be something that reflects when I read that. But that's just the Chair's comments, really. Thank you. I presume nobody's stepping forward to say anything further to that, so your point's noted, Malcolm. Thank you. Richard, planning and preparedness for COVID-19 update.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the update on this report in terms of our planning and preparedness, the report was provided in terms of a light touch review from H and my colleagues. Action plan agreed by the strategic leadership team, 16 actions to address the recommendations made, 7 of these being new. So the 10 actions that are remaining being progressed via other work streams. So we're saying that there are no action necessary, although for completeness, obviously they remain there for you to see and remain within the plan. And where existing updates are available, these are signposted as part of that reporting process. So today, 8 actions have been completed, with the remaining 8 progressing steadily. And our overall assessment of this is currently green and noted as 80% complete. So we're quite happy with this one at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Good. Thank you. Succinct overview. Colleagues? No? Okay, great. Thank you, Richard. Fire Safety Enforcement Action Plan, please.
So next one is Command and Control, Chair. Incident.
Apologies.
No, that's all right. This one is, there's 25 actions overall, as you can see in the appendix. 14 actions complete, 11 progressing well. 3 actions have been completed or reported completed within this period, as you can see. And the committee are asked to note and scrutinise the following. So you can see in 3.21, in terms of the further investigation, it's ascertained that one of our actions is incorrect, as supporting us surpass the original detail of the action. So it's that point we were just talking about. And the action to review the standard operating procedures and production of an operations appraisal for strategic leadership team was completed to the original deadline. And this has led to the creation and commencement of a document conversion project, which is ongoing. We had a meeting about that recently, but it goes beyond the original recommendation. The next one is the revised due date for the proposed action 5.417. I'm working on a couple of screens here, folks. Just hold on. So that one is related to developing guidance and command seminars, so the FDO duty group. And then there was a revised due date around 5.521, and that one is related to collaboration and training with emergency service partners, of which there is a fair amount going on, but incorporating partner deliver on all ICL training courses, so that continues. Overall, Chair, the RAG status is moved from green to amber. This is a timescale slip based on our RAG status for these things, but noted as 90% complete. Thank you, Chair. You're on mute, Chair.
So well. Noted, thank you. I don't have any questions scribbled on my pages here. Colleagues? No, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Next. Is that the fire safety action plan?
That's the fire safety enforcement action plan, thank you. So this plan contained 20 actions to address the issues raised. 17 already completed. The remaining live action that we've got in terms of 14.1 is 95% complete, continuing. But in terms of meeting its original due date, that's not been met. Although really that's just about, it's now with my legal team, they're just going over it in terms of giving it that final go through. So there's a proposed revised due date for that one. The colleagues also note there's 2 deferred actions which have been reviewed. However, timescales have not yet been set by NFCC. So these will remain deferred until we get those. And then there's a discussion about merging 2 of the deferred actions because effectively the same thing. But the overall, the RAG action, the RAG status for this is red, and that's due to the slippage of time. So everything that goes past 6 months, we move into red, but noted at 85% complete. Thank you, Chair. You're on mute, Chair.
Apologies. Yeah, okay, right. No, you've just answered that question. Thank you. Again, colleagues, anything to add? No, okay, marvellous. Thank you. We're getting there slowly. And then the LAI action plans and closing reports.
Yes, thank you. So colleagues will be aware the way we do this is if obviously there are local recommendations and they sit with the local teams, and the national recommendations that come from these are put into a local plan. You can see that in the appendices. So on the national plan, we've got 10 actions contained against that. Of these, 7 are complete and they relate to the closure reports, which you'll get. 3 remain live. They're related to Midlothian. I hope that makes sense to you all. It's just the way we do it. But in terms of the ones that are live, they are progressing steadily. We're quite happy with that, with 1 action noted as completed in the period. And then obviously with those related to the Edinburgh and the Dumfries inspections, we are content to close those now. And the closing reports are attached for you in Appendix H and Appendix I. For completeness, so there's full visibility. The closing reports do include both national and local recommendations, and we are content, as is our process, that those local actions have been signed off by the local service delivery and the service delivery management teams. Overall, RAG status is green with an 85% completion on that. Thank you, Chair.
No, excellent. New format like that. That's nice and succinct, easy to read, easy to understand. Particularly like the joint working aspects of recommendation 6 around joint working. And then also I've written good work next to the UFAS reduction for action 7 of the LSO. I thought that was excellent work. And let me just check. And yes, and good about the employee recognition scheme as well towards the end. So colleagues, before I just sort of make the Service Delivery Committee comment around this, any further questions? Nothing coming from that? No, excellent. Thank you. Scrutinised and good work. Thank you. Thanks for closing that down. Do you want to go on to the next one, Edinburgh?
So yeah, the Edinburgh inspection, all done now, closed. Content to accept that at SMB. So just again for the committee to scrutinise that closure report.
Excellent. Just a comment. I'm just interested on recommendation 7. It's not often written that in this sort of language, but the strength of the feeling amongst personnel in the City of Edinburgh regarding deployment is so strong that we think the LSO to continue to monitor the effect the staffing issues having on morale. Any comments anybody wishes to raise about that? Because that's obviously something HMFSI found whilst they were there, and that's quite a powerful word. If there aren't any comments, that's just an observation. I have one more question to ask. Nope. Okay, then just bear with me. Again, goes back to recommendation 9. I'm just interested to know this. The LSO should liaise with the Response and Resilience Directorate with a view to improving the policy around the mobilisation of the line rescue resource. So that was around improving the policy, and the service appears to have added the adjunct of the provision of a dedicated line rescue vehicle on that. And I just wondered whether or not that was over and above the HMFS. Is that another example of the work going over and above the HMFSI action?
It is, Nick, but it also relates directly to that issue that we've known. So it was an issue that had to be resolved to standardise all the line rescue resources into a single vehicle, as opposed to taking multiple appliances, which is currently the position in Tollcross. So that's been progressed now as well. So.
Okay, fine, thank you. Right, and then that's that shut now as well. So thank you to all for that. So
thanks, Chair. Just to say thank you, colleagues. We know there's a lot of information there for you all, but just to show you, this is the top of the process for us. As you know, we have the SMB process. Stuart and his team look at a lot of this through his improvement team as well. So there is a fairly good set of lines of defence around this now. So, but thank you all for your patience with the amount of information.
Yeah, and if I just add additional assurance, and hope Robert excuses me for this, but Robert's also attended the My Continuous Improvement Forum to see the approach that we take in terms of scrutinising progress against HMI reports, both thematic and national and local area inspections.
Marvellous. Okay, thanks for that reassurance, and thank you, Richard, for guiding us through that. 8.3, Stuart, over to you for AFA.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be very, very brief. As you signalled at the start, much of this will be discussed tomorrow at the Board Strategy Day. So it's just to give the committee a verbal update. The 12-week public consultation on options responding to AFAs ended on the 11th of October. And since then, the consultation team have been analysing the feedback and presenting key themes to the senior management for consideration. Consultation results report and the decision on a preferred option are being presented to the SLT on the 30th of November, and then a recommendation will then be presented to the board at its meeting on the 16th of December. You'll be aware the consultation results have been presented at the board strategy day tomorrow, so I'm not going to go into too much detail at the moment, but the consultation attracted 568 responses through the online survey and written submissions. So quite a good response to that consultation. A key part of the consultation approach was engaging with stakeholders to make them aware of the consultation proposals and seek their views, and there was almost 200 separate engagement sessions were conducted at national and local level in support of this consultation. So essentially there's extensive targeted engagement that's taken place, and this has really helped enhance the consultation results and considerations in support of a final decision. It's really quite noteworthy that some areas of the overall consultation feedback, which are considered by the SLT in an attempt to refine some of the proposals for change, and the context behind these areas and other themes emerging for the consultation, as I say, will be outlined tomorrow. So I'll pause at that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the brevity of your comment, really, because if we're going to spend 90 minutes talking about it tomorrow, then it seems more appropriate to spend that time there. Had the two meetings been swapped over, we could have perhaps picked up some elements that you're going to be talking about tomorrow and then discuss them in more detail here. However, I think it's probably more appropriate to wait until tomorrow. Colleagues, do you have any further questions to add on that, or are we all content? Okay. Thank you, Stuart. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to propose that we just have a quick 5-minute break now, and can we reconvene at 20 to 12, please, and we'll rattle through the rest of the meeting. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, minute 40, so I suggest we crack on. Item 9, handing over to John Dickey on operational clinical governance framework and the MOU. Oh, sorry, just hang on.
I got it, Chair.
So just handing over now to John, the clinical governance framework, the MOU with the Scottish Ambulance Service, and I'll just say it's great to see these milestones being achieved. So thanks for the work so far. Over to you, John.
Nick, I'll be brief. So the first paper up, and I don't know why it's not on the agenda, Nick, is the report that we said we'd bring forward. I've asked Richie Hall to join us this morning. He'll give a brief overview of the report that was done by the Scottish Ambulance Service into our current readiness as far as clinical governance was concerned, regards equipment and training, etc., which I know that was you were keen to see. So, Richie, I'll speak about the MOU, which will be very quick. The MOU took some time, and I wanted to come to this committee so that the committee could actually see it. It's been through the governance within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, as it has been within the Scottish Ambulance Service. It's been signed off now by the Scottish Ambulance Service, and now, after coming here today for information, it's purely a matter of getting the Chief and the Chief Executive of the Scottish Ambulance Service together for a wee signing ceremony. So I didn't intend to go through the MOU. It's just if there's any questions regarding it, but it's been through the scrutiny and governance throughout the service, and it's been written by our own legal team and checked and agreed by both SAS and SFRS. But happy to take any questions on the MOU, Nick.
There was just one very quick question I had, which I'll lead, and I'll come on to Malcolm. Adverse incidents or complaints, I just couldn't easily put my finger on which organisation was going to lead on that, or whether or not that was something that was felt is better covered elsewhere. It's the sort of thing I thought might be in an MOU, but it's not essential. So just adverse incidents or complaints. Who would be the lead organisation in that?
Is that actually contained within the MOU, Nick? Or is
no. I was saying that was my question really. Is that something that is something that should be contained in an MOU? It's really just a food for thought, John. Really, just
there will be a service level agreement which also supports this, Nick, and that would probably be where that would sit.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Complaints.
That's fine.
Richard Hall, I'm happy to be guided by you because it's you that's leading this. But that my understanding that if that was going to be the case, it would be an SLA.
I can confirm that, John. That will be an SLA, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thanks. I thought this was great. I've never fully seen the impact that this will have. I thought it was a good thing to do, but I thought actually even producing this document gives us a sense of direction and clarity, which I think is really, really helpful. Actually, helps me really understand what we're doing. It's just one very minor technical question. I noticed there's reference to duty of candour, which is a requirement now in health services and the care sector and so on, that if something goes wrong, you have to be open and transparent, sort of thing. Am I right in saying technically that probably doesn't apply to us? It's really just a point of information, really. I absolutely agree that it should be in there and it's helpful.
Sorry, Malcolm, I don't have the answer for that.
Okay.
So I can't answer that.
Aye.
No, I can, but I can't.
Malcolm, if the very fact that we're doing the clinical governance part was because we do provide care. They wanted to cover all aspects of what we would do if we were a care provider, and I totally get your point that isn't our initial remit or our main remit. However, because we do, by the nature of our job, that's why they wanted the duty of candour to be in there also.
Sure. No, that's really helpful. That was kind of what I expected, in the sense that that it's absolutely the right thing to do if that's an area we're working. Thank you.
Richie, that just actually goes in a sort of similar comment to the one I made earlier in the duty of candour. When you are looking further into the SLA, Malcolm's correct in so much that we don't actually appear on the government list for that, so that's fine. And whether or not we could then shelter under the umbrella of the Scottish Ambulance Service and any annual report that's required under a Duty of Candour Act, then is then reflected in their report rather than us having to do that. Just a thought. I don't have any questions. Colleagues don't have any further questions that I can see. No. Okay. Thank you, John, for that. Over to you. Back to you, John, for the other report.
Yeah, Nick. So, as I say, for some reason it's not on the agenda, but this is a report that covers that we'd said we were getting done when we first signed up with the Scottish Ambulance Service. I know it's something that you've been keen to see, so I'll just hand over to Rich and Rich knows to keep it brief as well and to the point. Thanks, Nick. Richie.
Thanks, John. So we have been appointed 2 members of staff from the Scottish Ambulance Service. We have a clinical governance manager who is Keith Culver, and a clinical effectiveness lead who is Donald McPhail, who is an advanced paramedic. Donald and Keith have undertaken a fair bit of review of what we call our immediate casualty assessment and treatment courses, ICAT courses. They've spent a fair bit of time going through those, looking for areas where for improvement, for example, how we can train our firefighters. The good news in that part is there is nothing of risk. They don't feel that there is anything missing or anything like that, so that is a great bit of assurance for us. However, they have identified areas of improvement, of which are contained within the report. In addition to this, at the same time, they undertook a consultation with firefighters to get their reviews on their training, their equipment, etc., and get a gauge on how they feel they are prepared to undertake the role when it comes to casualty care. Once they had completed that work, they also handed over the ICAT courses to the Scottish Ambulance Service training team for them to have a look at it. And the good thing is, between those different aspects, we all came back to the same conclusion, so that there is no risk there, but there is areas for improvement. They do think that our training courses go into a bit more too much detail, and that could be made a bit more interesting, a bit more video in there and a bit more hands-on. And with regard to the equipment that we carry, there is some recommendations within there as well. Now that we have this report, we are looking to convene our inaugural meeting of our technical working group. They will assess the recommendations, evaluate them, and then finally implement the ones that we can take forward. The technical working group will report to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Clinical Governance Committee, which will be an extension of the Senior Management Board. I hand over this paper to the committee for noting, and happy to take any questions.
I just got two very simple questions. Leslie, go ahead.
Thanks, Richie. Thanks, John. The consultation with the firefighters I thought was really good, and the results were fascinating. Is there, and it gives us a great baseline, is there a plan to revisit the consultation maybe in a year or 18 months after the revised ICAT training has been brought in?
Yes, I think we will do this continually throughout the journey we go on. The different aspects that some of the questions, the results back were firefighters were saying they were quite happy with some of the things they do, but a lot of it showed gaps. And what we're looking to do now is identify those gaps, put things in place to mitigate them, but also after that then say, right, you know, initially the reviews on this area of work were fairly negative. How do you feel on what we've put in place? So yeah, that will be continually the way we will do things, constantly reviewing the different aspects we put in place. And we see that the technical working group sitting potentially for the next 3-4 years, however long it takes, until certainly the service and the Scottish Ambulance Service are happy with all the training procedures and equipment we have in place.
That's super, thank you.
Great, thank you, Richie. Could I ask you a question on page 3 of 9, right at the very bottom, current activities, ongoing, number 3, engagement with the NHS Ambulance Services, brackets London and South Central. What is the purpose, out of interest, with London and South Central? Have they got particularly good relationships with their fire and rescue services?
Yes, in a word, the majority of Scottish fire and rescue services, police forces, etc., they sometimes go down the private route for clinical governance arrangements, where these two services have actually got them from their local ambulance services. So that's what we've been discussing with them to see how that relationship works. This has all had to be done through Teams. We are hoping that at some point in the future we can visit them, etc., and see how that relationship goes ahead. But that's the reason for those two specific services.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. And then the final question is the next page 5 of 9, sorry, paragraph sort of 2/3 of the way down. It says there's a need to identify the clinical scope of practice for firefighters. Where do you see that bit of work being undertaken? Where and when?
A lot of that we feel is, or that work has started with the consultation, and currently with a lot of the work we do in the community just now with regard to forced entry calls, etc., firefighters are dealing with a lot of medical cases rather than trauma cases, and that's where the gap seems to lie, is that if they do their full assessment of the patient stroke casualty as they normally would, they will identify what the medical concerns are. However, the training we have currently is all geared towards trauma, and there's nothing to do with medical patients. So that's one of the gaps that we've identified, and so that will continue, if I'm honest with you. But the consultation was the first step of identifying that. One of them, for example, another area within the consultation that was identified as a gap in the education of infection prevention and control. You know, and I suppose COVID-19 has highlighted the need for that, but that's an area that we don't cover in ICAT at all. So it's the consultation, as I said earlier, will continue, and we'll continue improving things as we go along, but we also need that feedback to continually make sure we're on the right track.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess that's the technical working group sort of type of remit. And it would be good, wouldn't it, to have a document that outlined the clinical scope of practice for firefighters, because that's almost your world, isn't it? So that's what you're aiming and targeting all the work to do with the clinical scope of practice. So excellent. Okay. With no further questions, thank you very much. Thank you, Richie, in particular, because an awful lot of work's gone into this. And it can't have been easy, particularly given all the stuff the ambulance service have been going through with to actually get to get their input into all this. So that must have taken a bit of perseverance. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks, John, as well. Let's now move back on to item 9.2 and the Grenfell Tower fire update, and back to Stuart. Oh, my apologies. Robert, did you want to say something particularly to the last piece?
It's actually to this piece, Chair, so it's remiss of me during declaration of interest not to declare an interest in this particular item. Doesn't result in a conflict of interest, but prior to being appointed as Chief Inspector, as you may know, I was operating as a consultant and carried out some work for London Fire Brigade, where I carried out an independent review of training. That review has now been submitted to the Grenfell inquiry as evidence and has been used during the inquiry on a number of occasions. So I think it's appropriate that I declare the interest, although I don't think that in my context within this arena, this forum, it doesn't lead to any conflict of interest, but I think it's important to get it just out there and onto the record.
No, excellent, and I agree with you entirely in everything you said there. I don't feel there's any further action, and colleagues will have noted that. Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. So this is Grenfell Action Plan Update number 9, and I'm pleased to report very good progress over this reporting period. Of the outstanding 16 actions, 8 actions are now complete and have been recommended for closure, and these are set out in section 3.8. As always, Appendix A provides the detailed action plan and obviously the measures we put in place to meet those actions and recommendations. One further action remains on track. 7 actions require timescale review, and the reason for this is that it predominantly relate to revised operational tactics, which predominantly, if a building fails during a fire, so that includes full evacuation, so stay put to full evac. These are dependent on further testing and exercising, and these will take place on the 8th and 9th of December, and therefore the timescales have been revised to reflect this. I think it's worthy of note that the previous exercises that took place just prior to COP26, which tested those recommendations, those 7 recommendations, demonstrated a number of areas that required further work. So it would be remiss of the service not to undertake that work and then subsequently test and exercise again. As previously, the HMI will be invited along to witness those exercises as well. In terms of the ongoing Grenfell inquiry, section 2.4 sets out the modules which comprise of phase 2 of the Grenfell inquiry, and to provide Service Delivery Committee with assurance both the service and Scottish Government follow this inquiry closely. Scottish Government have established a phase 2 working group which they chair, and representation including S4S is set out within 2.5 of the paper. I do envisage that there will be a significant number of recommendations far beyond those for phase 1, which will be much broader than just the operational element, but focus on the built environment, as the HMI touches on there, training, command, leadership and organisational culture, I think will be predominantly focused on. So in terms of this paper, the recommendations are set out in section 4, and I'm looking for STC to support closing of the 8 actions and approve the 7 revisions to timeframe to December of this year.
Apologies for the delay. Malcolm.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, very happy with the report and support the recommendations. Just one quick, just a little bit more information on GT16, which is the one all fire and rescue services develop policies for handling large numbers of fire survival guidance calls. You know, I understand you've got the control rooms, you've got the extra capacity that switches to another control room and so on. Is that enough to address this? You know, I suppose what I'm kind of reading into this is you know, as you say, you know, a high rise or something, an incident, a lot of people going, what do I do? I need to get through. I need to know what to do here. That seems to be a different level of the number of calls compared to people actually phoning in about an incident, if you see what I mean. So I would just welcome your comments on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that the process that's been been described there in terms of that top group that would start to divert calls to other control rooms is the best measure that we can put in place, to be honest with you, Malcolm. Just to put it in context, I believe that London Fire Brigade dealt with more fire survival guidance on that one night than they've ever dealt with combined. So that shows the magnitude of the issue that they were faced with, you know. So we do have routine incidents where we have large numbers of fire survival guidance. We had one recently in Lanarkshire, and I'll touch on that in the next Service Delivery Committee. So we do have good processes in place. I don't think there's anything else beyond that we could do in terms of what's been articulated within the plan, and it shows us a joined upness across NFCC through the mobilising operational group, which Libby Logan, our AC for Control, chairs. So yeah, hopefully that provides that assurance.
Okay, thank you.
Colleagues, any further questions? No, thank you then, Stuart. That's the SDC are happy to support those recommendations. Thank you. Okay, we're going to just now go on to item 10, climate change, a new heading within the agenda for this committee, and it was brought about with a with the obvious realization that climate change will be affecting us increasingly so as time goes on, and I think it's only appropriate that the Service Delivery Committee has a specific section that looks at these those issues. And to kick it off as our first climate change agenda item, we've got an overview report Stuart's going to talk to, and then Stuart and Peter are going to talk to. Apologies, Peter. And then an item specifically on service delivery around preparedness for flooding and water-related incidents. So I'll hand over to you, Stuart, initially.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'm delighted that Peter's joined us. Peter's the Environment and Carbon Manager. He's the driving force behind much of what takes place in terms of our management of carbon and environmental impact. And he's got a very small, lean team, but they punch well above their weight, and you'll probably find that out in the next few minutes when Peter probably talks about some of the work that's in train. So the purpose of this paper is to kind of provide the starting point, an update on the arrangements that SRS have in place to support the reducing of our impact on climate change. It's worth noting that Service Delivery, my directorate, don't have primacy for this. This sits within Asset Management. However, I do co-chair the Environmental and Carbon Management Board, which is chaired by John Thompson. So the Service have in place that board, and that oversees the strategic approach to climate change and climate change reduction. It's really worth noting the balance of this business going through the board. There's a great balance between the kind of practical solutions we're putting in place, some of which are detailed within the paper, and how the end users, i.e. Service Delivery, are actually putting these things into practice. And we've had some really, really good case studies coming forward to the board through my staff for saying, here's the impact of this house, here's how we're managing it. And it's shown there's a real connectedness between Service Delivery and Asset Management and the organisation as a whole to reduce the impact of climate change. Clearly, given the implications of this for the service and ensure that the board have oversight of this, it was felt prudent to bring this to this committee, and I think that's right as well. So the paper provides lots of examples of what we're doing. I don't intend to go through these in any details, but I'm happy to open up to Peter or to yourself for any questions. Peter, is there anything you want to
add? I don't think so, Stuart. First off, yes, nice to meet you all. I'm Peter Robertson, Environment and Carbon Manager. As Stuart just touched on, the paper outlines what we're working on just now, and I won't read it through with you. I have a overview tab here which I can share with the group, which will give you a clear idea of, or an overview of what we're working on just now, project-wise. And I'm happy to take any questions around the projects that are described in the paper there.
Thank you, Peter. That was a slightly more brief introduction to it. Perhaps it was the way Stuart introduced you there a little bit. Stuart, sorry, Peter, just give us a top level slice on your work. Just focusing on the headlines on those paragraphs, please.
Yeah, happy to do that. So we've been very fortunate this year in achieving successful bids for Scottish Government funding for decarbonisation of our buildings and also the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Looking first off at the decarbonisation of buildings, we are installing building management systems at a number of whole-time fire stations and corporate sites, and that gives us ability to control the energy use remotely on each site and implement the parameters that are outlined in our recently signed off heating policy. We are also installing heat boss control systems on retained stations. Now these give the station users a lot more interaction with the building's heating systems, and again allow us to set parameters to control those from afar. One of the larger pieces of work which was funded by the Scottish Government grants was our retained station energy efficiency packages. This is a holistic approach for retained sites that rather than addressing maybe just one or two elements, we're stripping out the fossil fuel gas boilers, replacing them with electric systems, improving the insulation on the site, installing PV panels and lagging pipe work, putting in new building controls. So it's really looking to improve the whole building fabric, and that has there's 45 retained stations which have gas heating systems currently, so the plan is to work through each of those. Our solar PV program has been running very, very well. By the end of this financial year, we'll have PV systems on 45 of the 72 whole-time sites, which will I think there will be about 7 or 8 sites left that are suitable for PV, allowing the renewable energy to be produced for the sites. And again, this can hook into the electric vehicle charge points as well. Insulation works. I'm sure everybody's well aware of how that works. The building fabric and the age of many of the buildings on the estate are poor, but due to the requirement to heat the appliance bays throughout the winter, there is a lot to be gained from improved insulation. Biomass boilers, we've had a good news story already this year with getting the biomass at national headquarters up and running. So between that and the PV, the site has reduced its carbon emissions quite significantly. We are also in the process, again through Scottish Government grant funding, of installing a biomass boiler at Fort William. That will be a containerised unit which will be it's a modular build. It's put together off-site, then dropped in a container next to the building and hooked into the system. AMRs, so automatic meter readers. We're going through a very large programme with EDF right now, putting in automatic readers on 190 of our sites, again allowing us to have more scrutiny over the energy use on each site, and it improves our ability to manage it and also the financial aspects of it all. And very recently we have been awarded a further 1.5 million from Transport Scotland for electric vehicle chargers. The programme for the next phase of this is going to run into March 23, and that's going to involve putting chargers onto every single remaining building that we don't have them on just now, every single building that has a car permanently based at it. So that'll be all whole-time sites, rural whole-time officer posts, training areas, corporate buildings. So that's equates to about 90 sites up to March 23, and there's a further 1.5 million bid in for the remaining sites the following year. The final piece of work we're working on is consultancy support for a heat pump design for whole-time fire stations, and this is the next stage, the larger, chunkier projects that we intend to move on to. So stripping out gas boilers from whole-time stations, replacing them with air source heat pumps, but also addressing the insulation package of the entire building whilst you're doing it, so that the pumps are spec'd to the energy requirement of the site. Happy to take any questions on that or anything else that the committee has.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Fantastic amount of work, and I appreciate you must be battling against competing priorities where you're doing your critical work. At the same time, we're just trying to upgrade buildings to minimum levels in some areas, and you're taking that quite a bit further with in terms of energy efficiency. So excellent, and as Stuart indicated, fantastic amount of work from quite a small team. Thank you, Peter. Leslie?
Thanks, Peter. This report was fantastic to see. It's just great to see the mainstreaming, I think, of so much of your work here, and the progress we're making on electric vehicles is phenomenal. And from the chat you've just given us, the progress that we're making in terms of buildings is really superb as well. You say you've been fortunate to get the grant funding. I think in my experience, it's the quality of the application and the expertise of the team that leads to the award of grant funding. So I suspect fortune and luck have got nothing to do with it. So very, very well done for the amount of external funding you're getting from this. A couple of questions, if I may. I'll just do them one at a time. The zero emission fire appliance, are we able to, other fire services are looking at this, presumably. Are we able to collaborate and perhaps share the costs of development there?
I believe so. I'm maybe not best placed to answer that. I'm involved on the board and we're meeting today. I know there are a number of other prototypes in development. From what I understand, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have quite specific needs in our appliance design due to the geographical range that we're looking to cover and the ability to move them in and out of different areas of the country. The tender has just come in, so I'm not sure if I'm not even aware who's bid for it yet, so I'm not sure if they're working with anybody else. I know that London are developing one. I believe there's a hydrogen one in development somewhere. I am very keen to stress that these are not zero emission appliances. These are low emission appliances because they will still pull from the grid and will have associated carbon.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And presumably we'll be looking at low emission, or are we looking at low emission smaller vehicles like the rapid response units?
First and foremost, the heavy appliances, what they're looking at. The rapid response units, I think right now because they're a new design, they'll have a Euro 6 engine, so their emissions will be a lot lower. And again, I'm maybe not best placed to comment on the requirement of the rapid response units. I'm not involved in fleet too much, but they operate in the rural communities, so there's quite a big an onus on the air quality issues associated with the heavies in the cities. So I'm sure that will come because it will be an easier problem to solve because the technologies are probably there.
Okay, thank you. Are we encountering any downsides at all with the electric vehicles?
There's certainly challenges which we're trying to work through, and that would be range anxiety for responding officers. The fleet I know have put in backup plans in terms of recovery of vehicles should they run out of battery, having responded to an incident. The range on the vehicles is now 300 miles on a good day, so most places in Scotland should be accessible. The infrastructure really is key here, and it's the ability to charge the vehicles across the estate and yeah, I think it's more familiarisation, but I think in the most part there will be areas to look at, but right now the challenge is getting the infrastructure in. Everybody in Scotland is trying to do what we're doing, or everybody in the UK. So trying to, coupled with all the international supply chain pressures and microchip pressures and all of this, it's all proven a bit lengthy.
Okay. Sorry, Stuart.
Les, I was just going to speak to that point, and just in terms of the kind of feedback from flex officers and rural full-time posts, aside from the range anxiety issue that Peter touches on there, have been really, really well received, to the extent that everybody wants one of the EV vehicles. But yeah, they've been really well received, and the work that Peter and Ian and the team have done in terms of creating that infrastructure to allow for charging to be done at multiple locations, it's quite incredible how many locations there are, has eased that somewhat. And I think that it's been warmly received.
Yeah, that sounds good. I've just ordered an electric vehicle ourselves, and I noticed the charging point that you've got down the street from where my daughter lives in Dufton. I thought, well, that's pretty good. My last point is about the KPIs, and this is more for Richard, perhaps. Richard, do we have the right kind of handful of KPIs reflecting our carbon emissions in the corporate set? What do you reckon?
Well, Peter's team already do a bit of that themselves, and I know Chris has been speaking to that team about, in terms of bringing that over and monitoring it through newer systems and doing that. But the team already do a grand job on some of that. I think the other point about some of the challenges that certainly we've discussed, I think Ian would probably wax on about this if he was here, but there is also interesting around the electric fleet that the maintenance element, because it's so different from the maintenance that our people have been trained on for many years. So there are implications as we move to more of an electric fleet about that, and training and the kind of equipment we're going to need in the workshops and all of that kind of stuff. Although that's just something that's come up previously in some of our discussions, but certainly on the monitoring piece, Peter's team do some of that, and Chris's team are engaged with Peter's team on thinking about metrics. Here we go.
Overview here. So this report drills down into quite specifically on building types, LSO areas, stations, fleet, whatever it might be. We track the carbon from each area and put out a quarterly report to the SLT.
Flipping brilliant, absolutely flipping brilliant, and we'll get a chance as part of the kind of annual review of the KPIs just to check that we're getting the right ones to the at the board level basket. I'm just delighted with this area of work, and thank you for bringing it to our attention, and more power to your elbow, Peter.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Leslie. And if there are no further questions, thank you, Peter. Excellent overview of a great deal of high quality work. Thanks very much indeed. Which then takes us back to Stuart, and the second report under the heading of climate change is the flooding and water related incidents paper. Stuart.
Thanks, Chair. So this is a first of a series of papers that we'll bring forward that shows how the service are responding from an operational perspective in response to climate change. So this one, we flooding. There'll be the subsequent ones on wildfire strategy and things like that as well. So one of the more obvious impacts of climate change is the frequency and severity of flooding and wild area flooding that we're having to deal with. And I think we'll all admit that we're having to deal with this a lot more often now, and dealing with really quite significant spate conditions that happen in a very short period of time. So the paper sets out what we've done in terms of what facilities we've got available in terms of water safety. And I'll just perhaps pick out a few points. So we've got 20 water rescue stations across Scotland that have boat capability, all of which have just been recently upgraded with new boat packages and equipment. And we also have 64 flood response stations across Scotland, and those were determined previously through the ROSE project, which is the specialist equipment, resource and specialist equipment project that was done by John Dick in his time, and R&R located those stations based on the risk there at that time. It's worthwhile noting that we continuously keep that under review through the OA process and through, where we start to see trends emerging. But as assurance, we don't have any issues at the moment in terms of lack of water rescue resources or capability for the current footprint. But I do emphasise the word current footprint, and there's a lot of work undergoing with the CRIM model. So as I said earlier, the CRIM model is factoring in future issues, and as part of that will be SEPA flood planning data will be featured into that, so then we can get a real data-led indication that our resources for water rescue are in the right place at the right time. So over the last year, not only have we upgraded the water rescue resources, we've also carried out a review of the standard operating procedure, and that went live on the 1st of February 2021. That's informed through National Occupational Guidance, the NFCC, and the DEFRA guidance that comes out in terms of water safety. As part of the operational strategy, we've got a standalone capability, and that will be published in April 2022, which will set out the current position with water rescue and how we see that moving forward, and how we will embrace technology through the use of drones, through the use of other water rescue technology going forward. In terms of benchmarking, Nick mentioned previously around about the want to benchmark against what we do. It's quite difficult to benchmark water rescue against other organisations within the UK, given our geography and scale. But what I'd highlight this fact is, within Scotland, responding to floods for the Fire and Rescue Service is a statutory role under the Additional Functions Order. It is not a statutory role in England. So, we've got a statutory footing to support us going forward, albeit services in England do put in place the resources as well. We're well connected with the NFCC, both in terms of national occupational learning and national occupational guidance. We're also leading on the review of the PPE replacement for water rescue, albeit I do believe that there's a number of challenges with that at the moment. So I think I'll pause at that. I'm happy to take any more questions on water rescue resources.
No, thank you, Stuart. Yes, again, an amazing amount of work going on there. Yeah, my comment around benchmarking really is just a general piece about all papers, but let's refer it back to this particular one now. Trying to get a feeling for where the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service sit in conjunction in comparison to other similar services, and absolutely note your comments there around it. It's a statutory responsibility within Scotland. Scotland's got a different geography, etc. I guess then I suppose the only thing that we could do really then is look at where we sit within the NFCC. I'm guessing, which is what you've indicated. So, any comparators would be warmly welcomed at the committee. Really, any comparators that we can say, are we leading the way with something, a particular skill set or a boat design, or in fact, as we were talking about before about the climate change and the heavy appliances, where are other organisations in respect to where we are? So it's that type of thing. But thank you very much for that overview. Richard, do you want to come back on that particular point, or what?
Yes, certainly something that we from a governance perspective will be reminding colleagues of more of. It's just maybe to answer that question that you raise across all committees, if we have it, obviously, or if colleagues are able to provide it. And then just an addendum to Stuart's piece around the water rescue and flooding. So obviously within Chris's team, there's an ability to analyse that, and we will provide that information to service delivery colleagues. And also, interestingly, some of our students that have been in, our master's students that we have from Edinburgh Uni in Glasgow, we've set them some topics around flooding and forecasting, particularly in relation to climate change. And some of their work's been quite interesting. It's all sort of theoretical stuff, but it may help us develop some of our modelling and analytical products in the future.
Might also furnish our conversation coming up with a future agenda item on risk. So I've got a question related to that, but I'll save that until then. I think we're going to go to Tim then, Leslie.
Thanks, Nick. Really just a very, very quick comment, Stuart. It's really encouraging to see in the paper an explicit reference to exploring innovation and using new technologies. It's always good to see, but or good to hear about, but good to see it written in that you're actively doing. I think it's a terrific example for the rest of the service.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Nick, okay, if I just come back on that point?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I keep referring to this all the way through today. The operational strategy, that is the running theme throughout that. It's not to look at how we currently do stuff. It's to look at how we could potentially do stuff going forward. You know, what is the art of the possible? What technology is available? So we stop doing what we've always done and start to think about other ways of doing things in terms of changing resources, assets, capabilities, and things like that as well. So thanks for that observation. But just to give you that assurance that all parts of our operational activity will be looked through that lens.
Very encouraging. Thanks, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Leslie.
Thanks for this. Very interesting indeed. Nick, you said we're going to be getting a series of papers of this type. For the future papers of this type, would it be possible to get a little bit of a quantitative context? Yeah, so for this I would have appreciated a number of flooding incidents and trends, and you know, same for wildfires, so that would be great. A particular question on this, I know this is about flooding, but if we can broaden it to, as you have done with water rescue, where are we with the inquiry following the spate of deaths in the summer, and is that likely to come back with recommendations that might affect us in terms of our resourcing for water rescue? Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. I've no indication that there is a formal public inquiry being set up or an FEI into those incidents, so I'm not aware of that. But what I can give you assurance around about is that internally, we've obviously carried out OA reports. We've also had a series of meetings with partners and a ministerial meeting where we've set out a number of actions that we'll take forward to support water safety in Scotland, both from a preventative and a response perspective. In terms of the response element to it, that will involve SMART2 running a series of exercises in the near future to make sure that blue light services are all completely aligned in terms of water rescue. In terms of preventative stuff, the service will take a lead in that. So we're going to second 2 officers to Water Safety Scotland to provide them with some resource and capacity to drive forward the water safety agenda in Scotland going forward. I've also had a series of meetings with various MSPs following those incidents as well to provide very localised assurance around about our approaches there.
That sounds all very good. And to clarify, perhaps I shouldn't have asked about an inquiry. I should have said maybe what is coming out of people asking questions for that spate of death. But that sounds very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Stuart. Right. Thank you, Stuart. Thanks for the overview on that. And I think the next one, I think we agreed one was wildfires, did we not? And
yes,
then and then noting Leslie's point there, yeah, it might be interesting as we move forward on this now is to look at sort of any trends, trend analysis around wildfires. Some of the statistics that we had from Bruce Farquharson some time ago were quite mind-boggling, to be quite honest with you, about the size of the wildfires that were occurring up in Murray and Caithness. So excellent. Okay, thank you. Good. Moving probably back to you, Stuart, now when we talk about risk and the committee-aligned directorate risks.
Okay, thanks. So just to present the risk register, the Service Delivery Committee risk register, which clearly features a number of risks, both aligned to my own directorate, but also asset management. So I don't intend to go through it all, Nick. What I would highlight is under Strategic Risk ID SD010. So the first, there's a phasing issue in terms of these risks because most of them have been reviewed since my DMT, so they've reduced. So it's just a flag that one will reduce because we have now recruited an additional 15 fire safety auditing officers, some of whom come fully qualified in fire safety as S4S staff is a real benefit going forward. In terms of the next one, SDO11 relates to MTA. Now, clearly that predates the MTA going on the run. So again, that risk has substantially reduced since our last meeting. Clearly, with this new format of the risk register, we provide the detailed actions that support reducing those risks. And those are detailed within Appendix 1C, along with the status of each of those actions. And that's to give the committee assurance that what's driving these control measures behind each of those risks to help reduce them. So it's probably easier, Nick, if I pause and just accept any questions on the risk register.
Sure. Just while I'm engaged in looking at this, could I just ask you, first of all, thank you for your comments there around the phasing issues, because there were a couple of things that jumped out at me, particularly the one I picked up on was the MTA element. But again, I guess also because of what you said earlier about it being a temporary issue and therefore it would have to be renegotiated. So obviously you're well on top of that, as I would expect you to be. The policies, going down to the risk rating of 8, this is Directorate Risk 004. The policies is the yellow 8 post your policy review, and forgive me if it's written further down in your mitigating actions, because that's you've just done a great big work around policies, haven't you?
That work's ongoing at the moment, so that reflects the work that's ongoing at the moment, Nick. And in reality, given that it's an 8, we could remove it from my Directorate risk register and de-escalate it to the functional one. However, given the significance of that piece of work, I've asked for it to remain there just so that we can all maintain sight on the progression of it at the moment. But that does reflect to that quite substantial project that's underway to review the policies.
Yeah, no, thank you. And the other thing I thought of is there's such an amazing amount of work going on. We're on the cusp of reducing quite a few in the future, aren't we? Particularly around, for instance, the UFAS work. And then mobilization, hopefully, with that goes ahead, and then operational systems, mobilization systems, etc. All that will be work there. There's one I'm just want to get to the one I was interested in speaking to you about. One thing which probably not for now because of both time pressures, but also I think probably lack of an appropriate detailed answer that will come out of work that Richard and his team may do as we move forward on future work. And it links into what Leslie mentioned about quantitative data is just that what if. This is a bit also linked into CRIM. It's about the what if climate change really accelerates. What happens if you'd like to hope that that wildfires and flooding are mutually exclusive, but what happens if if wildfires are really start to take off, flooding really starts to take off? Where's our capacity to absorb those increases? So just a point to note, really, that perhaps that could be something we could focus on future papers and answers, and that might be an interesting journey for us all, really, about where are the limits of what we might be able to deal with in the future, and how can we remain as agile as possible. Malcolm.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I would just welcome a little bit more background and thought. I'm really looking at appendices 1G and 1H. And there's a section there, and again, apologies if this has come up in other looks at the risk register or whatever, because sometimes these things come in slightly different contexts. But you've got under the risk description, you're saying basically there's a risk that SFRS cannot successfully engage with partners, community and other stakeholders. This would be due to inadequate internal resources. So that sort of paragraph is in a number of descriptions there. I just wondered if I'm missing something in terms of background. I mean, if we've got inadequate resources, it's going to affect a lot of things. Is this a specific risk that, it's been start date 1st of October 21, so it seems to be kind of newly identified, so to speak. And as I say, that paragraph, I think word for word, but maybe different in 1G and then a few times in 1H under different risks. So I would just I'd like to understand that a little bit better, what we're seeing as the risk there and kind of where it's come from.
Yeah, so that was there was 2 previous risks that were closed, and this new risk came on board, which encapsulated both those points from the previous one, Malcolm. This relates to what we talked about before in terms of home fire safety visits, being able to target home fire safety visits, being able to deliver home fire safety visits to high risk, being able to access data from partners, but also having the internal staff to allow that work to take place, so specialist community safety engagement staff. And we've put substantial investment into community safety engagement. There's been a complete strategic review of the P&P functional area, which resulted in a number of new strategic posts. There's also been an additional £1.5 million spent on community safety advocates. So all of those speak to this risk in terms of how we mitigate unintentional harm within the communities. But essentially, it boils down to that whole data sharing, partnership working, referral pathway piece of work as well, but making sure that we've got the staff and the infrastructure and the systems to be able to support it. So things like Safe and Well will be a predominant driver for this.
Okay, thanks. I mean, that's helpful. I think the thing that encouraged me is we're looking to, the control due is March next year. So it is something that we're actually addressing and moving forward with. So in that context, that's great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Let's move now to item 12. And Robert, over to you for a quick verbal update, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee members also for allowing me to come along and give an update. And also thank you, I think, importantly, for the change in status, Chair, and you and I spoke about this off table. I think it's a very subtle change from being an observer to being an attendee and being able to contribute when it's appropriate to do so. And I think that will add value as time goes on. And not just around the sort of value of being able to contribute to the papers, but one of the other important things for me, having come into this role fairly new, is to review the processes and practices that were in place previously. And I think one of those practices was around the carrying out follow-up inspections. After we had carried out our initial inspection, we would go back 12 months later and carry out a follow-up inspection, which is quite resource intensive for our department and also resource intensive for yourselves. And I think in terms of the legislation, what the inspectorate is there to do is to provide those recommendations, and the service then have regard to those recommendations. It's not up to us to come back and tell you how to action those recommendations or what direction to take, although we want to see some action and we want to see that our recommendations are being taken seriously. So, having considered how we might be able to do that better, I think one of the benefits of being an attendee at this forum and an attendee at Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, and also being able to have a relationship with directors within the service, is that I can directly observe the actions that are in place. I can directly see what is actually taking place and what progress is being made without having to carry out quite a resource-intensive follow-up inspection. So we will, with immediate effect, move to a system that we will no longer carry out follow-up inspections, but instead we will monitor your progress against our recommendations through the forums that are in place, both here at Service Delivery and at Audit and Risk Assurance. The only other element of that leaves us in sort of grey area is around local area inspections, because they don't get scrutinised here or at Audit and Risk Assurance, and therefore the recommendations that we make through local area inspections don't necessarily get the eye of the board on them unless they are indeed national in context. However, I think rather than calling that a follow-up inspection, what we will have are follow-up conversations. So when we publish anything at a local context that has to be actioned at a local level, we will follow that up with a conversation with the relevant person, the LSO or the DACO for the service delivery area, just to ensure that they understand the recommendations as they were intended, to give any clarity that was required before they start putting steps in place and delivering over and above what was our expectation, as we've spoke about today, or indeed completely missing the mark, as may be the case if we didn't have that conversation. So it's a move away from follow-up inspections, a move towards dialogue and conversation and scrutiny through the appropriate bodies that are already in place, i.e. the board committees, yourself and Audit and Risk Assurance. And hopefully that is welcomed. And all of that has been achieved because we're now able to attend rather than just observe at this meeting. So I'm very grateful, and it is quite an important change. In terms of an update, what I tend to do at Audit and Risk Assurance, and what I would suggest we do with yourself, is just to run through the work that's ongoing and then allow a bit of time for any questions of myself. So at the moment, within the Inspectorate, we are carrying out a number of thematic reviews. We have just completed the thematic review of the preparedness for the COP26 Climate Change Conference, as you know, and that report was published, and Stuart referred to it earlier. There are no recommendations and therefore no actions for you to take. And that was a deliberate decision based on the time of the conference itself. It would have been inappropriate to make recommendations given the conference would have passed by the time you got the report. So that we felt was a fairly positive report, and we would applaud the efforts of the service, both Stuart's directorate and the people who were tasked with preparing for that, but also John Dickey's directorate, and the amount of training that went into ensuring that those individuals who were going to respond were ready to do so. It should not be underestimated. So I think that the training element is a huge part also. Stuart referenced the MTA response, and there are comments within the report around our desire to see a permanent solution to that MTA issue, but we do understand and fully accept that this is a much bigger issue, a much more national in context, and that negotiations with the FPU will take some time, and in the interim, we are satisfied with the solution that has been put in place. And again, we would hope that that can be extended beyond the date that is in place at the moment. So COP26, quite happy with. Health and safety, we are carrying out a thematic inspection on health and safety in an operational context. The drafting of that report continues. Most of the fieldwork is complete, and it's likely that that will be published sometime around March of next year. And we'll obviously share it with you prior to it being published to get any feedback and any changes put in place. We're also carrying out a thematic inspection of high-rise firefighting, and that field work is about midway through. We've been to Aberdeen, we've been to Edinburgh and Renfrewshire and Inverclyde. Next week we're going to Glasgow and Lanarkshire, and then up to Dundee to meet with staff, control room staff, frontline firefighters and various partners, and have discussions around the issue of fighting fires in high-rise buildings. We expect that report to be published around about May of next year. We're also taking some national soundings from across the rest of the UK, as you would imagine. It's quite a topical issue, and we want to understand what systems are in place across the UK, but we will be very much writing a report based on Scotland's built environment and Scotland's response to the risks within this country, and not necessarily touching on what is happening in other parts of the country if it is not appropriate to do so. In terms of our, the other one thematic that was on the cards and had been in my annual inspection plan prior to me taking up post was a thematic inspection of operational equipment and PPE. Given the pressures of work and the capacity within my own department, and also given the overlap that existed between that inspection and an internal audit inspection that had been done fairly recently around operational equipment, I've taken the decision to pull that thematic and no longer carry that one out. I may well revisit it at some point in the future, but for the moment I've written to the Chief and the Chair to advise that we'll not be carrying out that thematic inspection at this time. In relation to local area inspections, we have now concluded the local area inspection of Argyll and Bute, and that has been shared in a draft format with the LSO and with the service, and we have considered and incorporated the feedback that was presented. That will be published prior to Christmas, probably about the 21st of December. We anticipate that that one will be published, and we have now started our fieldwork in the Angus LSO area, or the Angus local area, local authority area rather, and that is likely to conclude sometime around February of 21. Now, that will be the last inspection of that type that we undertake, and I'm not going to get into this in any detail, Chair, because I plan on doing a short presentation at your strategy day tomorrow. But the fact that we have been carrying out local area inspections, and I think they've been very valuable and very worthwhile, but we've been carrying out these inspections for the past 8 years since the service came into being, and we have concluded 16, including Angus and Argyll and Bute, of the 32 areas that there are in Scotland. So you can imagine that it's likely to take 16 years for me to have assurance that the service is operating effectively and efficiently across the whole of Scotland, and that just seems like a bit too long of a turnaround. So I've revised my approach to carrying out inspections at a local level, and I'll share more about that tomorrow when we meet at the strategy day. And I think that's all I've got to add, Chair, unless there are any questions.
No, thank you, Robert. That was that was just a good summary of what's going on at the moment. Thank you very much. Noting you and I have had conversations and will continue to do so, and I welcome those. Welcoming also your comments tomorrow at the strategy day. So looking forward to that. So thank you. Yes, and absolutely welcome to the committee, and I'm sure colleagues would agree with me on that.
Thanks.
So, thanks very much. Let me just refer back to the agenda. That takes us to item 13, forward planning, the committee forward plan. As you've received a copy at 13.1, there's not a lot to say about that. Not a lot to say about the forward plan. It remains, and always has done since I took over chair of this, as to be a fairly dynamic document that gets amended normally in between the meetings as we're approaching the next one at the pre-agenda meeting. So I'm more than happy with where we are on there. If anybody, just a reminder really, if any colleagues have anything they'd like to see on this in the future, then as Leslie did earlier, just please make that known to me, and I'm sure we can accommodate that. So unless somebody's got anything further to add to the committee forward plan, I'll move on to 13.2 and consideration for future IDF board strategy information development days. Well, given that we've deferred a couple of conversations around for tomorrow, I think that's really an indication of some elements of that. Does anybody have any further comments that they'd like to bring up towards a board meeting or IGF? No? Okay, thank you very much. And that then leaves us to a review of the action. Ali, I don't think we've had any specific actions. However, a couple of recaps on just points that were raised as opposed to specific actions. Just take me through those, please, so it refreshes my memory.
Certainly, Chair. Yeah, picked up 3 in total. So in relation to item 8, and like you say, not necessarily an action, but just for further conversation around high-risk home fire safety visit strategy between yourself and the Director of Service Delivery, Head of Function of Governance Strategy and Performance. That'd been Richard.
Right, so yes, we'll do that, Stuart, and I'll be in touch.
Next one, linking to item 8.2, just for the next update for the provision of operational risk information, more detail on mitigating actions for issues around operational intelligence tablets and the use of third-party suppliers. And
I'll cover that in the same conversation that I have with Stuart at the time.
Okay, and last one being a request by committee, and that relates to item 10.2, that for future thematic updates, next one being wildfires, that such like quantitative data or thematic trend or context or trends where possible be added to the report.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect, and Rich has just had to leave, but perhaps we could just make a note to include that for the future reports. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Ali. And then nothing left except for me to remind you that the next meeting is on Wednesday, the 23rd of February at 10 o'clock. That therefore concludes this public meeting element of the Service Delivery Committee.